In the silent heart of Andalusia, a lonely girl wept beside an ancient fountain, unaware that her tears would awaken a spirit bound by centuries of sorrow. From that night on, her life became a melody of mystery and fate, where love, music, and magic would intertwine beneath the silver moon. This is the legend of the Silver Oud.
One of the Arab princes of Al-Andalus had a habit of going hunting once every month. A large entourage of servants and attendants always accompanied him. Among them was a young knight named Masrur, a man of striking presence, handsome features, and exceptional courage. The prince held him in special esteem, trusting his loyalty, honesty, and devotion to duty. For that reason, he often entrusted Masrur with carrying his finest hunting falcons, those he valued most. One morning, when the prince had set out on one of his hunting trips, Masrur found himself without a task to perform. The prince had declared that day a time of rest for all, after several days filled with the chase of gazelles and birds. Masrur decided to take a solitary walk through the nearby forest to enjoy its enchanting scenery, the colorful birds, the clear flowing streams, and to escape, for a while, the noise and rigid order of the royal retinue. As he wandered among the trees, his eyes caught sight of a bird of strange form, unlike any he had ever seen. Curious and intrigued, he resolved to capture it. Removing the hood from his falcon's eyes, he set the bird free to pursue the mysterious creature. The falcon rose high into the sky until it disappeared from Masrur's sight. He stood waiting, expecting his bird to return with the strange prey in its talons, but it did not return. He gave a loud whistle, one of those sharp hunting calls used to summon falcons back, yet still there was no sign of it. Masrur had followed the falcon's flight closely and noticed it vanish behind a high wall enclosing a tall tower built along the edge of a narrow valley. Across that valley stood the remnants of an old palace. The tower was known among the people as the Tower of the Princesses. Descending into the valley, Masrur reached the place where the wall stood, but he found no gate leading into the tower. Circling around to the other side, he discovered a large gate opening onto a small garden before the tower. He stepped inside and followed a path lined with rose bushes and flowering shrubs. Everything around him was silent, so silent that he could hear only the beating of his own heart. At first, he thought the tower was abandoned, empty of life. But he quickly dismissed the idea when he saw how carefully tended the garden was, its design too graceful, its beauty too deliberate to be the work of chance. Such harmony could only exist under the care of a skillful hand. Masrur reached the tower's door and found it locked. He tried to open it, but in vain. So he bent down and peered through the keyhole, hoping to glimpse something within. There he saw a small, elegant hall with white marble columns. At its center stood a fountain surrounded by flowers, and beside it lay a large yellow cat, resting on a chair amid pieces of silk and embroidery tools. Beside the fountain, Masrur also noticed a musical instrument, adorned with fine arabesque ornaments, resting upon the floor. Wonder filled his heart There could be no doubt now that the tower was inhabited. Yet where were its dwellers? He neither heard a voice nor saw a soul. Still, the scene before him was proof enough that people lived there. He desired nothing from them, only to recover the falcon, the prince's prized bird, which had vanished atop the tower. He knocked gently upon the door and waited a while, his gaze lifted toward the tower's upper windows. Suddenly, a beautiful face appeared at the window above the entrance, but before Masroor could discern its features, it disappeared as swiftly as it had come. He waited, expecting that the one who had appeared would descend and open the door, yet no sound of footsteps was heard within. All remained silent. Masroor stood there, replaying in his mind the image of that fleeting face, as quick and bright as lightning. A strange thought crossed him. Perhaps the tower was enchanted. He had heard many tales of such places whispered by the people, and who knew? That large yellow cat he had glimpsed through the keyhole might be no mere creature, but a princess transformed by a wicked sorcerer whose hand she had refused in marriage. He knocked again, louder this time, and after a pause, the same lovely face appeared once more. Now he could see her clearly, a young maiden, barely 16, radiant with youth and grace. As he gazed upon her, all the stories of spells and sorcery melted from his mind. He could think of nothing but that face. At once, Masroor greeted her with gentle words that flowed like honey, imploring her politely to open the door so he might climb to the top of the tower and retrieve the falcon that had alighted there. But the maiden replied softly, "I cannot open the door, my lord. My aunt has forbidden me to do so." Masroor pleaded, "I beg you, fair lady, open it just this once. The falcon belongs to the prince himself. I cannot return without it." She asked, "Are you one of the prince's men?" He answered, "Yes, my beautiful lady, and if I go back without the bird, I shall lose the prince's favor and my place among his knights." The girl sighed, "Heavens, my aunt warned me never to open this door to anyone, least of all to men from the prince's court." Masroor, trying to win her trust, replied gently, "Your aunt is indeed a wise woman, for many at court have been cruel to innocent girls as fair as you, but I am not like them. I am a simple man, harmless, and in need of your kindness. If you refuse me this favor, I shall return defeated and broken-hearted." His words touched the maiden's heart. She felt a sudden compassion for the young man standing before her. He did not seem like the men her aunt had so often warned her about, those predators in noble garb, as she had called them, wolves in the form of men. Masroor stood before the door, his manner humble and gentle, and the girl found herself moved by his sincerity. Masroor sensed that the young maiden had softened to his plea. She gestured gently for him to wait, then disappeared from the window. A moment later, he heard the faint sound of her footsteps descending the stairs. Soon the heavy door creaked open, revealing a slender young woman of graceful bearing. She was dressed in a modest yet elegant peasant gown, her shining black hair parted neatly at the center, adorned with a single fresh red rose. Masroor stood speechless, struck by her radiant beauty. A warm flush spread across his face and fingertips, as though her presence had kindled a hidden flame within him. But Mesrour was a man of reason and noble restraint. He resolved not to linger with the girl, determined to show her that he was a knight of honor and virtue. So he thanked her sincerely and hurried up the spiral staircase with light steps, searching the upper chambers of the tower for the missing falcon. His search did not take long. In a few moments, he descended again with the falcon perched proudly upon his arm, his heart brimming with relief and joy. At last, he had found the prince's bird. He could now return safely and with honor. While Mesrour had been away, the maiden sat by the fountain, her hands resting in her lap, trying to calm the quick rhythm of her heartbeat. But when she saw him returning, she arose abruptly to her feet, and a piece of silk embroidery slipped from her grasp onto the floor. Mesrour bent gracefully, picked it up, and handed it back to her with a courteous bow, a gesture filled with quiet elegance and gratitude. The girl took the silk from his hand, her cheeks turning crimson with modesty and surprise. "Oh, my lord, what is this?" she murmured softly, unsure how to respond to such gentle manners. She had never before met anyone who spoke or acted so kindly. In her life, she had seen no one save her aunt, and that aunt had warned her endlessly to beware of all strangers. Mesrour understood her unease. He wanted to speak, to say something that might ease her trembling heart, but the words died upon his lips. All the graceful courtesies he had learned in the court of the prince suddenly seemed hollow and useless beside the pure innocence of this simple girl, as pure as a drop of morning dew. The maiden, in turn, saw in his silence and restraint something far greater than words, a delicate care, a quiet reverence, and in that stillness between them, she felt something awaken deep within her, a strange, trembling emotion she had never known before. Only then did she realize what it was, the tender beginning of love, filling her heart with warmth. Their moment did not last long. From afar came the sound of a loud voice, harsh and nearing quickly. The girl's face turned pale. "My aunt, she's coming," she whispered in alarm. "Please, my lord, you must go at once." But Mesrour, emboldened by sudden courage, said softly, "I shall go, but not before you grant me a token, the rose from your hair, that I may keep it as a sweet memory of you." Without hesitation, she plucked the red rose from her shining hair and handed it to him. Take it, and please leave now." Mesrour took the rose, and with it the heart of a pure young soul, and hurried away into the garden, disappearing beyond the tower's gate. When the aunt entered the great hall of the tower moments later, she found her niece pale and flustered. She demanded to know what had happened, and the girl, still trembling, told her the story of the falcon that had alighted upon the tower.
The old aunt gasped in distress. "May God protect us! Have you ever heard of such insolence? They trespass upon people's privacy and disturb their peace. How dare any of them enter the tower in my absence? Tell me, why did you allow it?" The young girl replied softly, "It was the prince's falcon, aunt." The aunt's eyes darkened. "So that's how it is. No one is safe anymore when the prince's men roam nearby." She was an elderly woman,
one who had never married. After her brother's death, she had devoted her life entirely to raising his daughter, nurturing her with care and discipline. Under her guardianship, the girl grew into a graceful young woman, beautiful and well-mannered. She rarely left the tower, and only then in her aunt's company. Yet, despite her seclusion, her beauty had become known throughout the neighboring villages. The people had given her a poetic name that suited her charm, the Rose of the Tower. Meanwhile, the prince's hunting expedition had ended, and his grand entourage was preparing to return. The old aunt stood outside the tower, watching the royal procession, the fluttering banners, the proud Arabian horses, and the mighty falcons perched on their masters' arms. The air shimmered with the dust kicked up by hooves, and the trumpets echoed through the valley. When the last banner disappeared beyond the hills, the aunt turned back toward the tower, her heart light with relief. The days of hunting were over. At last peace would return, and no strangers would come to trouble her or her niece. But her contentment was short-lived. As she neared the gate, a startling sight met her eyes, one that froze her in place. Before the tower's wall stood an Arabian horse, its reins hanging loose, and there, among the rose bushes, a young man knelt at her niece's feet. For a moment, the aunt thought she must be dreaming, but no, what she saw was real, undeniably real. A heavy pain clutched her chest. She quickened her steps, hoping to reach them unnoticed. But Mesrour, the young knight, caught sight of her approaching. He rose swiftly, murmured a quick farewell to the girl, leapt onto his horse, and vanished down the road before the aunt could utter a word. The girl stood motionless for an instant. Then a deep sorrow overcame her. She gasped, her body trembling, and fell into her aunt's arms, sobbing bitterly. Tears streamed down her face as she cried, "Oh, aunt, he's gone, he's gone. I shall never see him again." The aunt's voice was sharp with both fear and anger. "Gone? Who has gone? Who was that young man kneeling at your feet?" The girl answered through her tears. "He was one of the prince's knights. He said goodbye and left." The aunt's expression hardened. "What are you saying? One of the prince's knights? When did you meet him and where?" The girl whispered, "On the morning the falcon landed on the tower. It was the prince's bird, and he came searching for it." The aunt's voice rose, trembling with fury. "Foolish girl! How many times have I warned you about those men? Do you not know what they are? They are falcons themselves, ruthless and hungry." The aunt was overcome with furious regret, anger at her niece for disobeying her, and deep remorse for letting her go out to watch the prince's procession, leaving the girl alone in the tower. All had happened during her absence. Every warning, every plea she had made was in vain. But what could the old woman do now? The night was gone, and her only task was to calm the frightened girl. She gathered her into her arms, speaking softly yet firmly. "What good will this do, my dear? You are still so young, and your whole future lies ahead of you. What do you know of men, child? Their hearts flit about like birds, never still, never faithful. One day here, the next somewhere else. I only wish what's best for you. Come now, let's go inside. Forget what has happened." The girl quieted, allowing her aunt to lead her indoors. Yet in her heart, she could still hear the knight's tender words, his promise to love her forever. But how could she ever see him again, now that he had gone so far away? Could she truly believe in the love of a man she barely knew? To her, he was like a swift mountain stream gliding past the flowers along its banks, brushing them lightly before leaving them drenched in tears. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, but no word ever came from her vanished knight. Summer faded, and autumn arrived with its heavy rains. Then autumn, too, departed, making way for winter. The mountain peaks grew white with snow. Cold winds swept through the valleys and woods, and the trees bowed beneath their weight. At last winter passed, and spring followed in its gentle steps. Birdsong returned, blossoms opened their colors, and light rains bathed the hills and meadows. Slowly, the snow melted from the mountain tops until summer came once more. But the girl had grown pale and distant, her thoughts always wandering to the knight who had disappeared from her life. She could no longer see beauty in the world around her. Nature's wonders only deepened her sorrow. Her eyes, once bright and golden like clear honey, were now dim with tears. She knew well that the land she lived in, with its valleys, hills, and forests, was as lovely as paradise itself. But what joy could there be in paradise if one must dwell in it alone, without hope, as she did? Whenever her aunt saw her in such a state, her heart would ache with pity. She would sit beside her, speaking in that calm, wise voice of hers, full of sorrow and truth. "Alas, my foolish child, did I not warn you not to trust men? What did you expect from one born to luxury and wealth? You, an orphan from a poor family with nothing to your name. Even if that young man were sincere, even if he wished to marry you, his father would never allow it."
"My dear child," said the aunt gently, "you must be strong in spirit and will. Drive this ghost from your mind once and for all." Her words, though meant to console, only deepened the girl's sorrow. Yet they quieted her heart, leaving her too subdued to reply. Thus their days continued, uneventful and silent, with no sign or whisper of the vanished knight. But one summer night, something strange occurred. Near midnight, the aunt had gone to bed, leaving her niece alone in the courtyard. The girl sat by the edge of the fountain, gazing into the dark ripples, her thoughts drifting to the knight who had once stood there beside her, the very place where he had caught the silk scarf that had slipped from her hand, and where he had sworn eternal devotion. Her heart filled with sorrow and restless dreams. Tears welled in her eyes and began to fall,
one by one, into the still water. Slowly, the fountain's surface stirred, the ripples growing wider and higher, until the water rose in a shimmering whirl. From its depths emerged a woman, perfectly formed, of breathtaking beauty, clad in Arab robes encrusted with jewels and pearls. The girl froze in terror, then fled from the hall in panic. Sleep would not come to her that night. Her mind was a storm of confusion and wonder. When morning came, she told her aunt all that had happened: the strange woman rising from the fountain, the fear that had seized her. But the aunt merely smiled, trying to soothe her. "It was nothing but a dream, child. Your weary mind played tricks on you. Perhaps you fell asleep there by the fountain, thinking of the old tale of the 3 Arab princesses who once lived in this tower, and so the story slipped into your dreams." The girl looked at her aunt in surprise. "What story, aunt? I've never heard of it." The old woman nodded thoughtfully. "You mean you don't remember the tale of the 3 Arab princesses, Zaida, Zubaida, and Rhonda? They lived here long ago, forbidden by their father to marry. So they made a secret pact to escape with the men they loved. Zaida and Zubaida succeeded, but the youngest, Rhonda, was overcome by fear and could not flee. And so she chose to die in this very tower." The girl's eyes widened as memory stirred within her. "Ah, yes, I remember now. You told me this story when I was a little girl." Her aunt smiled faintly. "Indeed I did. And I told you then that Rhonda's fate brings tears to every heart that hears it." Then, after a pause, she added in a voice low with emotion, "You may weep for her long and bitterly, my child. Do you know why? Because the man she loved, the one she was too afraid to run away with, was your great ancestor. He mourned her for many years, until time at last healed his grief. He later married another woman, and from their lineage came you." The girl sat in silence, her mind deep in thought. Finally, she whispered, "Then what I saw was no illusion. It must have been Rhonda's spirit, bound to that fountain through all these years. What sorrow could hold her there still? Tonight I will wait by the fountain again, and if her spirit returns, I shall not be afraid. Surely the Arab princes will visit me once more." That night, the young maiden sat gracefully on the edge of the fountain, her gaze fixed upon the water, waiting for the princess to appear. The night was utterly still. When the bell struck midnight, the surface of the fountain began to stir, and gentle ripples swelled into rising waves until the Arab princess emerged once more. Fear fluttered in the girl's chest, yet she quickly gathered her courage. She stood wide-eyed in awe before the princess, a vision of ethereal beauty. The princess was young and radiant, her garments adorned with jewels that shimmered like captive stars, and in her delicate hand she carried a silver lute. Stepping forward, she spoke in a soft, sorrowful voice. "O daughter of the living world, why do you tremble so? Why do your tears fall into my fountain? Why do you weep beneath the silence of the night?" The girl answered through her tears, "I weep for my ill-fated lot. I am neglected and alone, unable to fulfill the dream my heart longs for." The princess replied gently, "Calm yourself, child. Your sorrow will not last forever. Before you stands an Arab princess who once suffered the same sadness you now bear. Your ancestor once held my heart and wished to make me his wife, but fear overcame me, and I could not flee with him. I waited until hope itself vanished. Then the evil spirits cursed me, binding my soul to this fountain. Only you can break this enchantment. Will you help me?" The girl said earnestly, "How could I refuse when your story mirrors mine?" "Come closer, my dear," said the princess tenderly. "Do not be afraid. Dip your hand into the water, take a handful, and sprinkle it upon my face while reciting the prayers and verses of the Holy Quran you know by heart. Then you shall see the spell dissolve, and my restless spirit will finally be free." The girl obeyed. She approached the princess, dipped her trembling hand into the fountain, lifted a handful of water, and sprinkled it over the princess's face while softly whispering her prayers. A serene smile lit the princess's features, her beauty now touched with peace. She had been released from the grasp of the dark spirits and could now ascend, free at last. Before vanishing, the princess spoke with heartfelt gratitude. "I shall never forget your kindness. As a token of my eternal thanks, I leave you this silver lute." The girl replied humbly, "Thank you for this precious gift, but I do not know how to play it." The princess smiled. "It is very simple. Touch its strings, and you will hear melodies sweeter than any you've known. This lute will grant you your deepest wishes." With that, the princess placed the instrument gently upon the ground, crossed her arms over her chest, and whispered, "May fortune and happiness be yours." Then, like mist under the moonlight, she faded softly into the air. The young maiden left the hall of the tower, her heart brimming with wonder at what had transpired between her and the Arab princess. When she finally retired to her bed, sleep eluded her for a long while, and even when it came, it was restless and fleeting. But at dawn, as the first rays of light filtered through her window, she awoke with a start, half convinced that all she had witnessed was nothing more than a vivid dream. Yet, when she descended to the hall below, the truth shone before her eyes. There, beside the fountain, lay the silver lute, gleaming softly in the morning light. Overcome with awe, she rushed to her aunt and recounted every detail of the miraculous encounter, then led her to see the lute with her own eyes. If the old woman had harbored any doubts, they soon vanished the moment the girl's slender fingers brushed the lute's strings. From it poured melodies so enchanting, so impossibly beautiful, that no ear born of man could resist their spell. The silver lute possessed an otherworldly power. Its music grew lovelier with each passing day, weaving harmonies that stirred the soul and carried listeners into realms of shimmering light and dreamlike beauty. Travelers passing near the tower would halt their journeys, entranced by the ethereal music drifting through the air. They would stand motionless as though bound by an unseen force, unable to move until the final note faded into silence. Soon tales of the silver lute and its bewitching musician spread far and wide. People from neighboring villages flocked to the tower, eager to catch even a whisper of those heavenly melodies cascading from the tower's window like rays of pure sound. The birds even joined in the reverence. They ceased their chirping and gathered in the nearby trees, tilting their heads as if enchanted by the song. The maiden became beloved by all. Invitations poured in from distant homes, and wherever she went, joy seemed to follow. Every house she visited filled with light and laughter, for her presence alone was a blessing. Her aunt accompanied her everywhere, ever watchful, guarding her from the gaze of admirers whose hearts shattered with longing each time her music reached their souls. The fame of the silver lute spread from town to town, from village to village, until no lips could speak of anything else. People spoke only of the girl with the silver lute and her music that seemed born of the heavens. But while the whole region was gripped by the madness of music, another kind of madness began to consume the prince's palace. The prince, once accustomed to hunting every month, had fallen prey to restlessness and dread. He grew anxious over his health, tormented by visions and fears that whispered he had been stricken by a mysterious, incurable illness. For many weeks he confined himself to his bed, venturing neither to the hunt nor beyond his chamber door.
Though the prince suffered only mild pains, his mind was tormented by dark whispers. He became convinced that death was stalking him, that each breath might be his last. In a moment of weakness, he proposed relinquishing his throne to another. His wife, the princess, would grow furious whenever he spoke of such things, for she was more than capable of managing the affairs of state during his illness. At last, she persuaded him to abandon that idea. Whenever the prince was overcome by his morbid delusions, music became his only true remedy. The princess made sure the palace was filled with the finest musicians in the realm, whose melodies could soothe even the most troubled soul. For a time, their harmonies eased his pain, until one dreadful day when no melody could reach him. The prince's delusion deepened to madness. He was certain that his life had already ended, that he was a dead man lying among the living. In his despair, he demanded that his funeral rites be held at once. It was a dreadful spectacle. The princess and his courtiers pleaded with him, unable to comprehend how they could bury a man still drawing breath. Yet the prince grew furious at their hesitation. He hurled accusations of treason,
cursed them bitterly, and threatened imprisonment for anyone who disobeyed. His attendants stood paralyzed between obedience and reason. How could they carry out such a command? Before any decision could be made, news reached the palace of a mysterious musician, a young woman whose music on the silver lute had enchanted all who heard her. Desperate for hope, the princess sent her fastest messenger to summon the girl. Days later, the envoy returned, bringing with him a vision of grace, the young musician herself. The princess was wandering anxiously through the garden when they arrived. At first sight, she was struck by the girl's delicate beauty and quiet dignity. The young woman wore an elegant village dress and carried her silver lute with gentle pride. But what caught the princess's attention most were her eyes shadowed by sorrow, as though they guarded a secret too deep to name. Her innocence and freshness made her seem almost otherworldly, worthy of her title, the Rose of the Tower. As was customary, her aunt accompanied her and recounted the story of her noble lineage. The princess listened with growing admiration. The girl came from a family known for its courage, generosity, and honor, and her father, it was said, had died a hero fighting for his homeland. Deeply moved, the princess said to her, "If your fame truly matches the enchantment of your music, and if you can drive the shadows of illness from the prince's mind, then I shall see to it that every dream of yours, no matter how impossible, comes true."
The heavy curtains were drawn tight across the windows, shutting out every trace of daylight. A few candles flickered weakly, their dim flames casting long, trembling shadows across the chamber. The young musician stood at the doorway, her heart tightening as she gazed upon the scene before her. Around the prince's bed moved silent figures clothed in black, their faces solemn, their steps ghost-like. For a moment, the girl believed she had come too late, that the prince was already dead. The princess pointed toward a chair in the corner and, without a word, gestured for the girl to sit and begin. Though fear trembled in her fingers, the girl gathered her courage, placed the silver lute upon her knees, and began to play. At first, the notes were soft and hesitant. Then slowly they rose, shimmering through the air like threads of light piercing the gloom. Soon the melody swelled into something so ethereal that all who listened felt as if it could not have come from human hands. The prince, who still believed himself among the dead, thought these divine harmonies were the music of paradise itself. His heart stirred, his spirit listened. The rhythm shifted gently, and then the girl's voice joined the music, clear, tender, and filled with ancient grace. She sang of the great deeds of the Arabs, of courage and honor, and the nobility of the soul. It was as though her very spirit was dissolving into each word, each note, drop by drop. The chamber overflowed with sound, a flood of pure, radiant melody that seemed to wash away every shadow of despair. As the music deepened, something miraculous began to happen.
The prince felt his delusions fade, his mind clearing as if a fog had lifted. Life, warm, vibrant, and undeniable, surged through his veins once more. He opened his eyes, lifted his head, and sat upright. A spark of vigor flashed within his gaze, and his face, once pale with fear, glowed with new vitality. He straightened proudly and called for his sword. The silver lute had triumphed. More truly, the spirit of the girl who played it had conquered where others had failed. The curtains were drawn open, and the golden sunlight of Andalusia poured into the room, bathing it in warmth and hope. Its rays fell upon the face of the young musician, revealing her beauty in full bloom. But as she saw the prince standing before her, alive, strong, radiant, her strength failed her. The lute slipped from her trembling hands, and the room spun wildly around her. Just as she began to collapse, a pair of strong arms caught her. When the dizziness passed, she lifted her eyes, and her breath caught in wonder. It could not be true, yet it was. The man holding her was Masroor, her beloved, her knight of dreams, the one she thought lost forever. She gazed in him in disbelief, then joy overtook her. She had healed the prince and found her love in the same blessed moment. She desired no treasure, no title, only to be united with Masroor. And so it was. Days after the prince's recovery, the palace glittered with celebration. The prince and princess themselves presided over the splendid wedding of the young musician and her knight. The courtiers rejoiced, the music soared, and the Andalusian sun shone down upon two hearts that, at last, found peace and happiness everlasting.